You step into the stable just as the sun slips behind the dunes, and the world outside the heavy wooden door shifts from gold to a soft, deepening blue. The building stretches before you in a long, low rectangle built from pale stone and thick timber beams that were hauled across the sand many years ago. Inside, the air still holds the warmth of the day, a gentle, drowsy heat that rises from the clay floor and settles in the rafters, yet the first cool breath of evening curls through the open doorway and brushes the back of your neck. The light inside is amber and quiet, coming from a handful of oil lamps spaced along the central aisle in iron brackets fixed to the wooden posts, their small flames burning steadily with barely a flicker. You pause just inside the threshold to let your eyes adjust after the brightness of the fading desert, breathing in the familiar blend of scents that live here permanently: hay, horse leather, dry earth, and the faint mineral tang of stone that has soaked up centuries of sun. The floor under your boots is packed clay, swept clean earlier in the day, and it shows the faint, overlapping half-moons of horseshoes pressed into its surface like a map of quiet movement. You stand for a moment and listen to the stable settling around you, the occasional rustle of straw from a stall, the soft blow of a horse's breath, the muted creak of a timber adjusting to the cooling air, and beyond these near sounds, the immense silence of the desert night beginning to gather outside the walls. You walk slowly down the center aisle, your footsteps making a soft scuff on the clay that seems to echo only a little before being swallowed by the straw and the thick air. The stalls line both sides, each with a half-door of weathered wood and iron hinges that gleam dully in the lamplight. You begin to count the horses, a habit formed from your first days in this place, and you move from one stall to the next, noting each animal with a calm and unhurried attention. In the first stall on your left stands a bay mare with a white star on her forehead, her ears pricked forward and her dark eyes following your movement without alarm. She shifts her weight as you pass, one hind hoof lifting slightly and then settling back into the straw with a whisper. Across the aisle, a chestnut gelding rests with his head low and his eyes half closed, the muscles along his back twitching once in a dream. You continue, counting under your breath, and soon the number matches the count written on the slate board near the tack room door at the far end of the stable. Every horse is accounted for, each in its own stall, some standing with necks arched over the half-doors, others lying in the deep straw with only the slow rise and fall of their sides visible. The reassurance of this small completeness settles into your mind like a stone into still water, and you feel the tension of the day begin to dissolve from your shoulders. As the twilight deepens outside the high, narrow windows set near the roofline, the interior of the stable grows dim in the spaces between the lamps. You walk back to the first lamp bracket, lift the glass globe carefully with a cloth wrapped around your fingers, and turn the small brass wheel that raises the wick. The flame stretches taller for a moment, then settles into a steady, golden bud that pushes the shadows back a few inches. You move from lamp to lamp, 6 in all along the aisle, repeating the same gentle motions: lift the globe, turn the wheel, watch the light steady itself, replace the globe. The oil in each lamp glugs faintly as you tip the reservoir slightly to check the level, and the smell of burning oil is faint, slightly sweet, mixing with the warmer scents of the stable. With each new lamp lit, the aisle becomes a soft corridor of overlapping circles of light that bleed into one another, and the horses' coats gleam in patches of chestnut, bay, grey, and roan. You notice how the light catches the white sock on a dark gelding's hind leg, making it glow against the straw, and how the dappled grey mare in the third stall seems to shimmer as if her coat were made of watered silk. These are small, quiet details that you would miss in full daylight, and the lamplight gives them a gentle intimacy that belongs only to the night. After the lamps are lit, you walk the aisle once more, this time checking every stall door latch. You place your hand on each iron latch, lifting it slightly and letting it fall back into its catch with a soft, solid clink. The sound repeats, stall after stall, a small rhythm that marks your progress along the stable. The wood of the half-doors is smooth under your palm, worn in the center, where countless hands and the rub of curious horse noses have polished it to a dull sheen. You press gently on one door that sits a little loose in its frame, and make a mental note to plane the edge tomorrow, a task so small it barely registers as a thought. Then you move on. At the stall of the tall grey gelding near the end of the row, you pause a moment longer. He is the oldest horse in your care, his muzzle flecked with white hairs, and he stands with one hind leg cocked and his lower lip drooping in an expression of deep, uncomplicated peace. You reach over the door and run your hand lightly down the flat plane of his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin and the slight tickle of short hairs against your palm. He does not move except to blink slowly, and you withdraw your hand after a moment, leaving him to his rest. The tack room waits at the far end of the stable, a small square space partitioned off by a half wall of vertical planks. You push open the door, which swings on leather hinges without a sound, and step inside. The room smells strongly of leather and neatsfoot oil, along with the fainter scent of old wood and the dry grass of a broken bale stored in the corner. One oil lamp burns here already, set on a small shelf above a wooden stool, and its flame is steady, illuminating the racks of bridles and halters that line the left wall. Each bridle hangs by its crownpiece from a wooden peg, the leather dark and supple, the metal bits gleaming with a recent polish. Below them, on a lower rack, saddles rest on shaped wooden stands, their seats worn smooth and their girths looped neatly over the pommels. A folded blanket lies across one saddle, its wool the color of sand. On the opposite wall, a narrow workbench holds a few simple tools, a stitching awl, a spool of waxed thread, a tin of leather dressing, and a small sharpening stone resting in a shallow dish of oil. The floor here is wood rather than clay, and it creaks faintly under your boots as you cross to the stool. You sit on the stool, which is little more than a shaped plank on 3 legs, and let your weight settle fully, for the first time since you entered the stable. The stool is not particularly comfortable, but its familiarity makes it welcoming, and you lean your back against the rough planks of the wall with a slow exhale. From here, you can hear the stable more completely, the soft tear of hay as a horse pulls a mouthful from its net, the low, rumbling sound of a stomach at work, the occasional stamp of a hoof on clay, a sound more felt than heard. You close your eyes, and the darkness behind your lids is warm and reddish from the lamplight. You let the sounds wash over you without naming them, simply receiving them as one receives the sound of rain or wind, and you feel the boundary between your own body and the stable begin to soften. Your breathing slows until it matches the long, steady rhythm of the horses, and for a while you simply sit, not sleeping, not thinking, just being in the quiet center of the night. After a time you open your eyes and rise, knowing that the first feeding cannot be delayed much longer. But before you begin that work, you take a moment to walk to the stable's main door, which you left slightly ajar when you entered. You pull it open just enough to step outside into the small courtyard, and the change in the air is immediate and complete. The heat of the day is gone, replaced by a coolness that feels almost liquid against your skin, and the sky above is a deep indigo velvet scattered with the first faint stars. The desert stretches away in all directions, a dark and silent ocean of sand and rock, and the stable behind you glows faintly with the lamplight spilling from its high windows. You stand still, feeling the cool sand under your boots and the immense quiet of the world, and then you turn and go back inside, pulling the door closed until only a finger's width of night remains visible. The stable wraps around you again, warm and close and full of the breathing of horses, and you walk back toward the feed room with slow, deliberate steps, ready for the next small task that the night will bring. You pause in the aisle once more before reaching the feed room, and you lean your forearms on the half door of the dappled grey mare's stall. She turns her head toward you, her large dark eyes reflecting the lamplight in 2 tiny steady flames, and her nostrils flutter as she catches your scent. You do not speak because words feel too large for this hour, but you stand there with her for a long, slow count of breaths, and the simple presence of the animal is a kind of conversation without language. Her coat is warm under your hand when you reach out to pat her neck, the hair lying flat and smooth, and the muscle beneath it is firm and relaxed. She shifts her weight from one foreleg to the other, and the straw under her hooves crunches softly, a sound like the turning of a page in a very old book. You watch the way her ears swivel to catch a distant sound that you cannot hear, perhaps a night bird or the settling of a stone somewhere out in the desert, and then they return to a soft, forward angle that means she is at ease. This small exchange, this moment of mutual quiet attention, is one of the reasons you find such peace in the night stables, and you file it away in your memory without needing to examine it. The stable now is fully settled into its nighttime state, the lamps all burning evenly, the horses calm, the shadows deep and still. You push yourself away from the stall door and walk the remaining length of the aisle to where the feed-room door stands open, a darker rectangle in the lamplit wall. Before you enter, you glance back over your shoulder and see the long perspective of the stable, the twin rows of stalls, the pools of light, the curve of a grey rump visible over a half-door, the soft gleam of iron latch and hinge, and above it all, the dark wooden trusses of the roof fading into shadow. The sight is so familiar and so peaceful that it settles into you like a lullaby, and you turn to your work with a quiet mind, ready to measure out the grain and begin the first feeding of the night. The twilight has passed, the true dark has arrived, and you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done, one small task at a time, until the desert dawn. The night has fully settled around the stable by the time you rise from the wooden stool, your legs a little stiff from the stillness, and you move without haste toward the feed-room at the end of the aisle. The lamplight in the main corridor has mellowed into a steady, honey-colored glow, and the shadows it casts are soft-edged and still, as if the whole building holds its breath. Your boots make the familiar soft scuff on the clay floor, a sound that belongs to this hour alone, and you pass the stalls one by one, catching glimpses of horses standing with their heads turned toward you, ears forward, because they know what comes next. The feed-room door stands open, and you step through into a smaller, warmer space that smells of crushed oats and dusty bran and the faint, sweet undertone of dried herbs mixed into the feed to keep the horses healthy. The scent is so thick here that you can almost taste it on your tongue, a dry, nutty flavor that settles in the back of your throat. A single lamp hangs from a beam overhead, its flame reflected in the dark glass of a small window set high in the wall, and the light falls directly onto a wide wooden bin filled with grain. You pause for a moment just inside the door to let your senses adjust to the new space, and you take in the familiar arrangement of the feed-room with a slow, sweeping glance. The grain bin stands against the far wall, a sturdy chest of dark wood with a hinged lid that you have opened and closed 1,000 times. Beside it, on a low shelf, a row of buckets waits in descending order of size, each one made of thick leather, stiffened with use, their iron handles worn smooth. A wooden scoop hangs from a peg above the shelf, its bowl shaped by a craftsman's hand and polished to a dull gleam by years of sliding through oats. On the wall to your right, a scrap of parchment is nailed to the rough plaster, the list of horses and their feed portions written in a careful hand with ink that has faded to a rusty brown. You step closer and read the names, though you know them by heart. The bay mare gets 2 scoops, the chestnut gelding 1.5, the dappled grey mare 2 full scoops with a pinch of the herbal mixture, and so on down the line of stalls. The list is a simple thing, but it brings a small sense of order to the night, a reminder that every creature in your care has its own particular need. You reach for the wooden scoop, and your fingers close around the handle with the ease of long practice. The wood is warm and smooth, oiled by the touch of hands, and it fits into your palm as if it grew there. You lift it from its peg and turn to the grain bin, pushing back the heavy lid until it rests against the wall with a soft thud. Inside, the oats and barley mingle in a pale, speckled sea that glimmers faintly in the lamplight, and the smell that rises from the open bin is rich and clean, like a field after harvest. You lower the scoop into the grain, and the sound it makes is a gentle, rushing whisper, a cascade of tiny hulls and kernels sliding over one another as the bowl fills. You lift the scoop carefully, level it with a slight shake of your wrist, and pour the first measure into the leather bucket waiting on the floor. The grain falls in a thin, steady stream, rattling against the bucket's sides with a sound like distant rain, and when the scoop is empty, you dip it again, repeating the motion with a rhythm that soon becomes automatic. Counting under your breath, you fill the first bucket with exactly 2 scoops for the bay mare, then move on to the next, adjusting the amount as the list dictates. The work of measuring feed is quiet and repetitive, and you let your mind settle into it without resistance, as if sinking into a warm bath. There is a small pleasure in the precision of the task, the way each scoop rises full and tips empty, the way the grain piles up in the buckets in little mountains that shift and settle. The dust from the oats rises in tiny clouds, catching the lamplight and swirling like mist, and you breathe through your nose to avoid sneezing. Once all the buckets are filled, you line them up along the floor of the feed room in the order of the stalls, a row of dark leather vessels, each holding a slightly different shape of grain heap. You wipe your hands on the front of your tunic, feeling the fine, dry grit of oat dust on your palms, and then you bend to lift the first 2 buckets, one in each hand. The weight pulls at your arms and shoulders, a familiar, grounding strain that reminds you of the realness of the work, and you carry them out into the aisle. The horses have grown more alert as the minutes have passed, and you see heads turning over half doors, ears swiveling toward the sound of your footsteps, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of the grain. You walk to the stall of the bay mare first, because she is the first on the list, and because she always waits with a quiet patience that deserves to be rewarded quickly. You hook 1 bucket over the iron bracket set into the stall wall, making sure it sits level so the grain will not spill, and you step back to watch. The mare lowers her head immediately, her soft muzzle dipping into the bucket, and she begins to eat with a steady, rhythmic grinding of her jaws that fills the stall with a low, contented sound. Her teeth work the oats and barley in circles, crushing the kernels into a mash that she swallows in small, unhurried gulps. And every few moments she lifts her head just enough to look at you with one dark, liquid eye before returning to the bucket. You stand there for a little while, watching the muscles of her jaw and neck move under her sleek coat, and then you turn to the next stall. The chestnut gelding across the aisle receives his bucket with a low rumbling nicker that vibrates in his throat, a sound of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. He buries his nose in the grain before the bucket is fully settled, and a few oats scatter into his straw, where he will find them later with careful lips. You move on, carrying the next pair of buckets, feeling the weight shift as you walk, the iron handles pressing a line into your fingers. At each stall you repeat the same small sequence: lift the bucket, hook it over the iron bracket, check that it hangs securely, and pause to see that the horse begins to eat without trouble. The dappled grey mare takes her feed with a delicate, almost fastidious manner, nibbling at the edge of the pile before working her way inward, while the older gelding at the end of the row eats with a slow, grinding patience, his eyes half closed as if the taste of the grain carries him to some private dream. Each horse is different, and yet the scene is fundamentally the same. A creature and its food, a simple satisfaction that needs no words. When all the buckets are hung, and every horse is eating, you step back into the center of the aisle and simply listen. The stable is filled now with a steady, layered sound of chewing, a soft chorus of molars grinding grain, and the occasional snort of a horse clearing its nostrils. Underneath the chewing there is the faint sound of breathing, the deep, regular pull of air into large lungs, and the rustle of straw as a horse shifts its weight. The lamplight flickers once, a tiny dance of the flame that comes and goes in an instant, stirred by a draught that you cannot feel, and the shadows on the beams tremble in response. You stand still, in the middle of this quiet symphony, letting the peace of it wash over you, and you feel the last remnants of any daytime hurry drain away. There is no clock here, no urgent task beyond the one you are doing, and the night stretches ahead of you in a long, calm line. After a few minutes of this stillness, you return to the feed room to tidy what remains. The scoop still hangs from its peg, and you take it down and wipe the bowl with the dry cloth that hangs from a nail by the door, removing the fine film of grain dust that clings to the wood. You sweep the floor of the feed room with a small hand broom, its bristles scratching softly on the planks, gathering the few scattered oats that escaped during the measuring. Each small movement is unhurried, a quiet ritual of care for the space itself. You return the scoop to its peg, lift the lid of the grain bin to check the level, and note that there is enough for several more nights, the surface of the grain dimpled where the scoop has pressed. The list on the wall catches your eye again, and you run a finger down the names, a silent confirmation that no horse was missed, and then you turn away, leaving the feed room as orderly as you found it. Back in the aisle, you walk a slow circuit of the stalls, pausing at each one to look over the half door and check on the horse inside. The bay mare has finished half her bucket and is now eating more slowly, lifting her head between mouthfuls to gaze at the far wall with a dreamy expression. The chestnut gelding has already cleaned his bucket and is licking the bottom with a long pink tongue, chasing the last traces of grain dust from the leather. You reach over the door to retrieve his empty bucket, and he nudges your shoulder with his nose, a gentle, hopeful push that asks for more, but you pat his neck and murmur a few soft words, and he accepts the end of the meal with a sigh. The dappled grey mare is still eating, picking out the pieces of dried herb with particular care, and the tall grey gelding at the end is chewing with the slow, meditative rhythm of the very old, his eyes almost entirely closed. At each stall, you either wait for the horse to finish or remove the bucket if it is already empty, stacking the empties by the wall so you can rinse them later. The process of collecting the buckets takes you back along the aisle, and your arms grow tired again as the stack grows heavier, the leather buckets clunking softly against one another. You carry them all to the stone trough that runs along the back wall of the stable, a long, shallow basin fed by a pipe from the well outside. You set the buckets down and work the handle of the small pump at the end of the trough, and water gushes out in a clear, cold stream that splashes against the stone. You rinse each bucket one by one, swirling the water around the interior to wash away the last sticky residue of grain and saliva, and then you tip the water out into a drain in the clay floor. The sound of the water is bright and clean, a sharp contrast to the dry rustle of the grain, and it leaves the air smelling faintly of wet stone. You set the rinsed buckets upside down on a wooden rack to dry, arranging them in a neat row so they will be ready for the next feeding, and you dry your hands on the cloth from the feed room. With the buckets clean and the feeding finished, the stable begins to shift into an even deeper quiet. The horses that were standing are now settling, their full bellies making them drowsy, and one by one they lower themselves into the straw with a series of careful movements, a bending of the knees, a folding of the hind legs, a slow, controlled descent that ends with a heavy sigh. The straw crunches and rustles as they arrange themselves, and then the sounds fade into near silence. You walk the aisle one more time, checking that every stall door is latched and that no bucket has been left behind, and you notice how the lamplight has dimmed slightly, the oil in the reservoirs burning low. The air feels thicker now, heavy with the warmth of sleeping animals, and the scent of hay and horse and the faint lingering sweetness of the herbal feed mix settles around you like a blanket. The first feeding of the night is complete, and the stable rests, waiting for the next small task in the long, slow arc toward dawn. You lean against the door frame of the tack room, feeling a pleasant tiredness in your arms and a deep calm in your mind, and you listen to the breathing of the horses as it merges into one long, continuous sound, a lullaby without words that fills the stable from floor to rafters. The feeding is done, and the stable settles into a deeper stillness as you turn your attention to the water. The horses have drunk little during the heat of the day, and now, in the cool of the night, their thirst will wake and call them to the trough. You walk to the back wall of the stable, where the long stone basin runs beneath a row of small, high windows, and you run your hand along its rim, feeling the smooth, cool stone that has been worn into a gentle curve by years of muzzles and water and the patient work of time. The trough is still half full from the morning, the surface of the water dark and still, reflecting the lamplight in a long, wavering line of gold. You dip a finger into it and find it cool but not cold, and you decide to empty what remains and fill it fresh, because the horses deserve clean water for the long night ahead. You pull the wooden plug from the drain hole at the end of the trough, and the old water gurgles out onto the clay floor, running in a thin, dark rivulet toward the drain set into the center of the aisle, where it disappears with a soft, gulping sound into the earth below. You take a stiff-bristled brush from a hook on the wall and scrub the interior of the trough in long, sweeping strokes, loosening the faint film of dust and hay that has settled on the stone since morning. The bristles make a steady, scratching sound against the stone, a rhythm like the whisper of wind through dry grass, and you work your way from one end of the basin to the other, dipping the brush into the last puddle of water to rinse it as you go. When the trough is clean, you wipe it down with a cloth, leaving the stone damp and dark and smelling faintly of wet rock. You replace the plug, pressing it firmly into the drain hole until it sits snug and tight, and you stand back to survey the empty basin, ready to be filled again. The night outside the small windows is black now, the deep, complete blackness of the desert far from any town or campfire, and you know that the stars will be thick and brilliant when you step out into the courtyard to work the well. You push open the narrow door at the end of the stable, and the desert air greets you with a coolness that feels almost solid, a presence against your skin that carries the faint, dry scent of sage and warm stone and the immense, empty spaces beyond the walls. You step outside, and your boots crunch softly on the packed sand of the courtyard, a sound that seems very loud in the silence before the night swallows it. The courtyard is a small square, enclosed by the stable on one side and low stone walls on the other three, and in its center stands the well, a circular structure of fitted stones with a wooden beam and a winding crank above the dark mouth of the shaft. The sky overhead is vast and deep, a dome of black velvet scattered with more stars than you could count in a lifetime, and they shine with a steady, cold brilliance that makes the lamplight inside the stable seem dim and earthly by comparison. You pause for a moment with your face tilted upward, and the sight of so many stars, arranged in their slow, silent patterns, fills you with a quiet sense of your own smallness and of the peace that comes with it. You walk to the well and place your hands on the wooden crank, feeling the grain of the wood under your fingers, warm, smooth in the center, where countless hands have gripped it before yours. The rope is thick and coarse, made of twisted hemp, and he runs over a grooved wheel at the top of the beam before dropping down into the darkness. You begin to turn the crank in a slow, steady circle, and the mechanism responds with a series of familiar sounds. The creak of the wooden axle turning in its iron brackets, the faint rasp of the rope against the wheel, and the distant hollow splash as the bucket far below strikes the surface of the water. The crank is heavy at first, resisting your arms as the bucket fills and the rope grows taut with the weight, and you settle into a rhythm that matches your breathing, a slow pull and release that becomes almost like a meditation. The stars wheel imperceptibly overhead as you work, and the only other sound is the soft whisper of the rope and the occasional creak of the well house settling. The bucket rises slowly, its progress marked by the dripping of water from the rope as it emerges, dark and wet, from the shaft. You can hear the water sloshing gently inside the bucket, a liquid, musical sound that carries in the still air. When the bucket reaches the top, you reach out with one hand and guide it over the stone rim, then tip it carefully into the large clay jug that rests on the well's edge. The water pours out in a clear, silvery stream, glinting faintly in the starlight, and it fills the jug with a deep, resonant note that rises in pitch as the level climbs. The first jug full, you lift it with both hands, feeling the weight settle against your chest, and you carry it back toward the stable door, walking slowly so the water will not slosh over the rim. Inside, the warmth of the stable wraps around you again, and you pour the water into the stone trough, watching it spread in a dark, gleaming sheet across the bottom, and begin to climb the sides. The sound of the water against the stone is soft and hollow, a deep, musical note that echoes slightly under the wooden roof. You return to the well for a second jug, and then a third, each trip following the same unhurried pattern: the creak of the crank, the splash of the bucket hitting water, the slow rise of the rope, the pour into the jug, the careful walk back to the stable. Your shoulders and arms settle into the work with a pleasant, steady ache, and your mind grows quiet, occupied only by the simple rhythm of the task. On the fourth trip, you pause at the well and look up at the stars again, noticing how the constellations have shifted slightly, the great sweep of the Milky Way sliding just a little to the west, though you have not been working long. Time moves differently out here, under the vastness of the desert sky, and you feel no need to measure it. You lower the bucket again and listen to its distant splash, and the sound seems to come from very far away, as if the well reaches down into another world, a dark, quiet place of cold water and silence. After the 5th jug, the trough is nearly full, the water level rising to within a hand's breadth of the rim, and you make one more trip to top it off, pouring the last jugful in a slow, deliberate stream that ripples the surface and sends tiny waves lapping against the stone sides. You set the empty jug by the door, where it will be ready for the morning, and you step back to look at the trough, now brimming with clean, cool water that reflects the lamplight in a shifting golden net. The sight is deeply satisfying in a way that requires no explanation, a simple completion of a simple task, and you run your hand over the surface of the water, feeling its coolness wrap around your fingers before you flick the drops away and dry your palm on your tunic. The horses have sensed the fresh water, and you see heads lifting over half doors along the aisle, ears pricked toward the sound of the splashing. You open the stall of the bay mare first because she is nearest, and she steps out into the aisle with a slow, careful gait, her hooves clopping on the clay. You do not lead her because she knows the way, and she walks directly to the trough, lowers her muzzle, and drinks in long, slow draughts that pull the water up into her mouth with a gentle suction. You stand beside her, one hand resting lightly on her flank, and you feel the muscles of her throat working as she swallows, the water moving down in rhythmic pulses. She drinks for a long time, pausing once to lift her head and let a few drops fall from her lips back into the trough, then lowering it again for more. When she is finished, she steps back, gives a small shake of her head that makes her bridle jingle faintly, and returns to her stall without being asked, settling into the fresh straw with a sigh. One by one you open the stall doors and let the horses out to drink, and they come in their own order, some immediately, others waiting until the aisle is clear before stepping out with a slow dignity. The chestnut gelding drinks with a noisy, enthusiastic slurping that sends ripples across the water, while the dappled grey mare approaches with delicate steps and sips as if tasting a fine wine. The tall grey gelding, the oldest, takes the longest time, standing at the trough with his eyes half closed, drinking in slow, measured gulps that seem to last for minutes. You wait beside him, your hand on his shoulder, and you feel the deep, steady beat of his heart through your palm, a slow and ancient rhythm that speaks of patience and endurance. When he finally lifts his head, water dripping from his grey muzzle, he turns and presses his full head gently against your chest. For just a moment, a gesture of trust that warms you more than any fire could. He returns to his stall, and you close the half door behind him, latching it with a soft click. After all the horses have drunk their fill, you walk the aisle one more time to check that every stall door is secure and that no animal shows any sign of discomfort. The trough is still nearly full, the water barely diminished, because horses drink what they need and no more, and you know it will last through the night and into the morning, when you will change it again. The air in the stable feels fresher now, the scent of cool water mixing with the warmer smells of hay and horse, and the lamplight seems to burn a little brighter, as if the flame itself has been refreshed. You pick up the clay jug and step outside one last time, not because you need more water, but because the night calls to you with its silence and its stars, and you want to feel the desert air on your face before you settle into the deeper quiet of the hours ahead. Outside, the courtyard is exactly as you left it, the stars still burning, the sand still cool underfoot, the well still standing in its patient vigil. You walk a slow circle around the courtyard, your footsteps the only sound, and you pause at the low stone wall that marks the boundary between the stable grounds and the open desert. Beyond the wall, the sand stretches away into darkness, featureless and immense, and the horizon is a faint line where the starry sky meets the black earth. The silence is so complete that you can hear the blood moving in your ears, a distant oceanic sound, and you breathe in the dry, clean air and let it fill your lungs. There is no wind, no movement, no sign of life, and yet the desert does not feel empty. It feels full of a quiet presence, a vast and patient stillness that has no need for words. You stand there for a long while, letting the peace of it soak into your bones, and then you turn back toward the stable, where the warm lamplight spills from the doorway like a welcome. You step inside and close the door behind you, dropping the heavy bar into its brackets with a solid thud, and the stable wraps around you again, warm and close and full of the breathing of horses. You walk to the trough one last time and dip your own cupped hands into the water, bringing it to your lips and drinking deeply. The water is cool and sweet, tasting faintly of the stone deep underground, and it washes away the dust of the grain and the dryness of the desert air. You dry your hands on your tunic and stand for a moment in the center of the aisle, listening to the sounds of the stable, the slow chewing of a horse still working on its hay, the rustle of straw as another shifts in sleep, the soft drip of water from the trough's rim onto the clay floor. The first watering of the night is done, the horses are content, and the long, quiet hours stretch ahead of you like a road without end. You feel a deep and simple satisfaction, the kind that comes from doing necessary things with care and attention, and you let it settle over you as you walk toward the tack room, ready for whatever small task the night will bring next. The water trough is full, the horses have drunk, and a deep quiet has settled over the stable like a blanket of soft wool. You stand in the center of the aisle for a moment, letting your breathing slow and your shoulders drop, feeling the pleasant tiredness in your arms from the work at the well. The lamplight burns steady and golden along the walls, and the horses are calm, some lying in the straw with their legs folded beneath them, others standing with one hind hoof tipped and their eyes half closed. The night outside the high windows is still and black, and the stable feels like a small island of warmth and light floating in an ocean of desert silence. You know that the next task is grooming, and you look forward to it with a quiet, patient pleasure, because brushing the horses is a slow and gentle work that asks nothing of you but attention and care. You walk to the tack room and push open the door, which swings on its leather hinges without a sound. Inside, the small space smells of leather and oil and the faint dry sweetness of old hay, and the single lamp on the shelf burns with a small, steady flame. The grooming tools hang on a wooden rack fixed to the wall beside the bridles, each one in its own place. The stiff bristled body brush, the softer finishing brush, the metal curry comb, the hoof pick with its short iron hook, and a folded cloth of clean linen. You take down the body brush first, feeling the weight of it in your hand, the wooden back smooth and polished from use, the bristles stiff and dark and slightly curved at the tips. You run your thumb over the bristles, and they spring back with a faint rasp, clean and ready. You take the curry comb as well, hooking it over your belt, and you carry the brush out into the aisle, where the first horse waits. The bay mare is standing in her stall with her head turned toward the door, her dark eyes watching you with a calm, expectant expression that seems to say she knows what comes next. You lift the iron latch and swing the half door open, stepping inside with slow, quiet movements so you do not startle her, though she has never been a horse that startles easily. The straw rustles under your boots as you approach her shoulder, and you reach out with your free hand palm flat and rest it on the warm curve of her neck. Her coat is smooth and slightly dusty under your fingers, and the heat of her skin rises through the hair to meet your palm. You let your hand rest there for a few seconds, feeling the steady pulse of blood beneath the surface, and the mare exhales a long, slow breath that ruffles the straw near her feet. You begin to move the brush in your other hand, but first you lean close and speak a few low, meaningless words, the kind of murmuring that horses seem to understand, not by their meaning, but by their tone, and the mare's ears swivel toward your voice and then relax outward again. You start the brushing at her neck, just behind the jaw, where the muscle is thick and the coat lies flat and short. The body brush moves in long, even strokes that follow the grain of the hair, from the curve of her throat down toward her chest, and with each stroke a fine dust rises into the lamplight, tiny particles that glitter like gold before they settle. The bristles make a steady, scratching sound as they move through the coat, a sound like dry leaves stirred by a breeze, and the mare stands perfectly still, her weight balanced evenly on all four legs, her head lowering slightly as the brushing works its quiet magic. You use your whole arm for the strokes, not just your wrist, so the motion comes from your shoulder and flows down through the brush in a smooth, continuous sweep that covers a broad path of her coat. Every few strokes you pause and draw the brush across the metal curry comb held in your other hand, and the bristles clean themselves with a sharp, rasping noise. the dust and loose hair falling in a small, soft pile onto the straw. You work your way down from the neck to the shoulder, following the slope of the muscle where it curves from the withers to the upper leg, and the brush glides over the flat plane of her shoulder blade with a whisper. The mare shifts her weight just a little, leaning into the pressure of the brush as if asking for more, and you oblige by pressing a fraction deeper, letting the bristles reach through the coarse outer hair to the softer undercoat. The warmth of the friction rises against your fingers, and the coat begins to take on a faint, healthy shine, the deep bay color glowing in the lamplight like polished wood. You move the brush in overlapping circles now, each circle connecting to the next without a break, covering every inch of her shoulder and upper leg, and the pattern of the strokes is as regular as the turning of a wheel. The dust continues to rise and fall, and the mare's breathing deepens until it matches the rhythm of your arm, a slow in and out that fills the stall with a steady, peaceful sound. After the shoulder you move to the barrel, the long rounded curve of her side that rises and falls with each breath. You place your free hand on her back, feeling the ridge of her spine under the skin, and you begin to brush along the ribs in horizontal strokes that follow the natural contour of her body. The bristles whisper over each rib in turn, and you count them without meaning to, one after another, a silent tally that keeps your mind focused and calm. The mare's coat is thick here, a little coarser than on her neck, and the brush raises more dust, a fine pale cloud that catches the lamplight and drifts upward to disappear into the shadows of the rafters. You clean the brush against the currycomb more often now, the sharp rasp punctuating the softer whisper of the brushing, and the pile of dust and hair at your feet grows slowly, a small soft mound that will be swept away later. The mare sighs, a deep heavy exhale that seems to come from the very bottom of her lungs, and you feel her ribs expand and contract under your hand, a slow tidal motion that speaks of deep contentment. You work your way back along her barrel to the flanks, where the hair is finer and the skin more sensitive, and here you lighten the pressure of the brush, letting the bristles just graze the surface. The mare's skin twitches once, a small ripple of muscle, and then she relaxes again, her tail swishing gently to one side. You brush carefully around the curve of her hip, following the line of the bone down toward the stifle, and the lamplight shows the subtle dappling of her coat, lighter patches that shift and change as she moves. You pause to clean the brush once more, and then you step back and look at the mare with a slow, assessing eye, checking that you have covered every part of her near side. The brushed areas gleam with a soft, living sheen, while the unbrushed far side still carries the dullness of dust, and you make a mental note to work your way around to the other side when you finish here. You move now to her hindquarters, the great powerful muscle of her rump that rounds out from her spine and tapers down to her hocks. The brush travels in long, sweeping arcs that follow the curve of the muscle, and you can feel the sheer strength of her under your hand, the dense, coiled power that could carry her across miles of desert at a gallop. But here, in the lamplight and the quiet of the night, that power is dormant, and she stands as still as a statue, letting you work the brush over every inch of her. You brush down the back of her hind leg, using shorter, more careful strokes, and you feel the hard ridge of her tendon under the skin, a taut, clean line like a bowstring. The mare lifts her hoof slightly when you reach her fetlock, as if offering it to you, and you make a mental note to pick her hooves out when the brushing is done. You circle around her hindquarters to her far side, stepping carefully through the deep straw so you do not crowd her against the wall, and you begin the whole process again on the opposite flank. The brush moves in the same steady rhythm, neck to shoulder to barrel to hip, and the mare turns her head to watch you with one dark, liquid eye, her ears swiveling back and forth with quiet curiosity. The dust on this side is thinner because she tends to lean against the stall wall with her near side, and the brushing goes a little faster, the coat shining up quickly under the bristles. You clean the brush less often, and the rasp of the currycomb comes at longer intervals, a soft, metallic punctuation to the whispering of the bristles. The mare's breathing has become so deep and regular that she seems almost asleep on her feet, her eyelids drooping and her lower lip hanging loose in an expression of perfect peace. When both sides of her body are brushed clean and gleaming, you move to her legs, and here you switch to the softer finishing brush that you have tucked into your belt. The stiff brush goes back into its loop, and you take the soft brush in your hand, feeling its lighter weight and the gentle give of its bristles against your palm. You kneel in the straw beside her foreleg, and she shifts her weight slightly to allow you access, lifting her hoof a little so you can brush the fine hair around her fetlock. The soft brush moves in small, gentle circles, cleaning away the last traces of dust and straw from the delicate skin, and you work your way up the leg from hoof to knee, following the straight line of the cannon bone. The mare stands perfectly still, her head lowered and her breathing steady, and when you finish one leg, you move to the next, repeating the same small, careful motions until all four legs are clean and the feathering around her fetlocks is soft and fluffy. You rise from your kneeling position and stretch your back, feeling the slight ache of the posture, and you run your hand once more along the mare's flank, feeling the smooth, warm coat under your palm. The brushing is nearly done, but there is one more task, and you take the hoof pick from your belt and move to her near foreleg. You run your hand down the back of her leg, and she lifts her hoof willingly, placing it in your cupped hand like a gift. The hoof is warm and slightly damp, and you bend to inspect it in the lamplight, seeing the dark, healthy frog and the pale, clean sole. You take the hoof pick and carefully, gently, work it around the edge of the shoe and the cleft of the frog, removing a few small pebbles and a compacted plug of sand and straw that has lodged itself in the hollow. The debris falls into the straw with a soft patter, and the mare sighs again, a long, contented sound. You release her hoof, and she places it back on the clay with a soft thud, then offers you the next one without being asked. You work your way around all four hooves, finding very little that needs cleaning because the stable is well kept and the horses do not stand in their own mess, but the ritual of it is calming, a small act of care that completes the grooming. You step back from the mare and look at her with a slow, satisfied gaze, taking in the gleam of her coat, the soft, clean legs, the tidy hooves, and the peaceful droop of her head. She looks back at you with her calm, dark eyes, and then she lowers her head further and nudges your chest with her nose, a gentle, thankful push that makes you smile in the dim light. You pat her neck, feeling the warmth of her skin and the soft prickle of her short hairs, and then you let yourself out of the stall, latching the half door behind you with a quiet click. The chestnut gelding in the next stall is waiting with his head over the door, his ears pricked forward and his nostrils flaring, as if to ask why he has not been brushed yet. You take the body brush and the curry comb back in your hands and open his door, stepping inside to begin the same slow, careful process on his copper-colored coat. The gelding is younger and a little more restless than the mare, shifting his weight from foot to foot as you approach, but you rest your hand on his shoulder and murmur a few low words, and he settles into stillness with a soft, quivering breath. His coat is a shade lighter than the mare's, a bright, ruddy chestnut that catches the lamplight and glows like embers, and the brush raises a fine red-gold dust that smells of warm skin and sunshine, though the sun set hours ago. You work your way down his neck and shoulder in the same steady rhythm, the bristles whispering and the curry comb rasping, and the gelding soon relaxes into the brushing, his head dropping until his nose nearly touches the straw. The grooming of the chestnut takes a little longer, because he is larger and because he seems to enjoy it so thoroughly, leaning into the brush with almost his full weight until you have to brace your feet against the clay floor. You do not mind the extra time, because the night is long and there is nowhere else to be, and the simple repetitive motion of the brush is as soothing to you as it is to the horse. You work around his body, his legs, his hooves, and when you finally step out of his stall, he gives a great full-body shake that starts at his head and ripples all the way down to his tail, a shower of the last loose dust falling around him like a fine rain. You close his door and move on to the dappled grey mare, then to the other horses one by one, and the night deepens around you as you work, the lamplight burning low and steady, the only sounds the whisper of bristles and the soft, contented breathing of the animals in your care. By the time you return the brushes to their hooks in the tack room, your arms are tired and your mind is as calm and empty as the desert sky, and the stable is filled with the quiet radiance of clean, brushed horses resting in the straw. The grooming is finished, and the stable breathes around you with the slow, contented rhythm of horses at rest, their coats gleaming softly in the low lamplight. You stand in the aisle for a moment with the brushes still in your hands, feeling the pleasant ache that has settled into your forearms and shoulders, a tiredness that is more like warmth than strain. The oil lamps have burned down slightly, their flames smaller and steadier now, and the shadows along the rafters have deepened into a soft, velvety darkness that seems to absorb sound. You return the brushes to their hooks in the tack room, wiping the wooden backs with a dry cloth before hanging them neatly side by side. And then you turn your attention to the next task, which is the bedding. The stalls have been used since morning, and the straw that was fresh at dawn is now flattened and soiled in places, no longer the clean golden bed that a horse deserves for the long night ahead. You walk to the corner of the stable where the pitchfork leans against the wall, its wooden handle worn dark and smooth by the grip of many hands over many nights. The tines are iron, slightly curved and polished to a dull gleam at the tips where they've slid through straw and clay again and again. You lift the fork, feeling its familiar weight, the balance of the long handle in your palm, and you carry it back to the first stall, where the bay mare stands with her head over the half-door, watching you approach with calm, dark eyes. She knows this routine as well as you do, and she does not move when you lift the latch and step inside, though she turns her head to follow your progress, and her ears swivel forward with mild curiosity. The stall is warm and smells of horse and hay, and the faint, earthy scent of manure that is not unpleasant, just a natural part of the stable's life. The straw underfoot is packed down into a dense mat, flattened by hooves and the weight of a resting body, and in the far corner you can see the darker, damper patches where the mare has relieved herself during the day. You begin by using the pitchfork to lift the soiled straw, sliding the tines carefully underneath the damp clumps and lifting them with a slow, steady motion that keeps the mess contained. The forkful rises, dripping a few loose strands, and you carry it across the stall to the wooden barrow that waits in the aisle just outside the door. The straw lands in the barrow with a soft, rustling thud, and a faint cloud of dust and chaff rises into the air, catching the lamplight and swirling before it settles. You return to the stall, find the next patch, and repeat the motion: slide, lift, carry, drop. Each trip is unhurried, your movements deliberate and smooth, and the barrow slowly fills with the spent bedding. After the soiled straw is removed, you take up the pitchfork again and begin to fork out the remaining clean straw that is still dry but too flattened to be comfortable. You work in sections, lifting the matted layers and shaking the fork gently so that any clean strands separate and fall back into the stall, while the broken, dusty pieces go into the barrow. The shaking motion makes a soft, rhythmic rustling, a dry whisper that fills the small space, and the mare stands quietly against the far wall, her weight shifted onto 3 legs, watching you with a placid, unblinking gaze. When the stall floor is mostly bare, you set the pitchfork aside and take up the stiff broom that leans against the doorframe, its bristles worn to an angle by use. You begin to sweep the clay floor, starting at the edges and working your way toward the center, collecting the last bits of chaff, stray grains of oats, and the fine, powdery dust that has sifted down through the straw. The broom makes a steady, scratching sound on the clay, a sound like wind through dry reeds, and the dust rises in a thin haze that drifts toward the high window. You sweep carefully around the manger and the water bucket, around the iron rings set into the wall, and you gather everything into a small pile just inside the door, which you then scoop onto a flat wooden shovel and tip into the barrow. The stall is empty now, the clay floor bare and slightly cool under your boots, and you take a moment to inspect it in the lamplight. There are no damp patches remaining, no hidden clumps, and the clay is smooth and hard, swept clean to its natural pale brown. You lean the broom against the wall and step out into the aisle, where the barrow is now full, nearly to the brim with a mixture of soiled straw, dry chaff, and a few scattered droppings. The smell from the barrow is strong but not harsh, a deep organic scent of earth and waste that belongs to the stable and is part of its life. You grip the handles of the barrow and wheel it slowly down the aisle toward the small door at the back of the stable that opens onto the midden pile outside. The barrow's wooden wheel squeaks faintly with each turn, a small high note that cuts through the silence and then fades, and you push through the door into the cool desert night. The midden pile lies just beyond the courtyard, a low, flat mound of straw and manure that will be spread on the fields when the season turns, but tonight it is simply a dark shape against the darker sand, sending up a faint, steamy warmth into the cold air. You tip the barrow forward, and the load slides off with a heavy, rustling sigh, tumbling onto the pile and settling into the existing layers. You stand for a moment, breathing the cool air and looking up at the stars that are still thick and brilliant overhead, their light cold and steady. The desert is silent except for the faint, distant yip of a fox, somewhere far out in the darkness, a sound that comes once and does not repeat. You right the barrow, turn it around, and push it back into the warm lamplit stable, closing the door behind you. Now comes the fresh straw. You leave the barrow by the door and walk to the hay store, the lean-to built against the north wall of the stable, where bales are stacked in tidy rows and the air smells sweet and grassy. A single bale sits open from the morning, its twine cut and pulled aside, and you break off several thick flakes with your hands, feeling the crisp, dry stalks crackle under your fingers. The straw is golden and bright, even in the dim light, and it releases a clean, summery scent that cuts through the older smells of the stable like a fresh breeze. You gather an armload, cradling it against your chest, and carry it back to the empty stall, where you drop it onto the clay floor with a soft, whispering thud. The straw spreads out loosely, a pale, uneven layer that you begin to distribute with the pitchfork, pushing and fluffing it into the corners and along the walls. You work the tines through the pile, lifting and shaking the stalks so they separate and fill with air, creating a deep, springy bed that will cushion the mare's weight and keep her warm through the coldest hours of the night. The process is slow and repetitive, the fork rising and falling, the straw rustling and crackling, and you lose yourself in the rhythm of it, your mind empty of everything but the texture and sound of the task. When the bedding is thick enough, at least a hand's depth, you smooth the surface with the back of the fork, evening out any hummocks or thin spots, and you pat the straw down gently around the edges so it will not spill out under the door. The stall is transformed, the floor now a soft, golden carpet that gleams in the lamplight, and the clean, grassy smell fills the small space with a promise of comfort. You step back into the aisle and go to the bay mare, who has been waiting patiently with her lead rope looped loosely over a tie ring on the wall. You untie her with a few quick, gentle movements, and she turns to follow you without being pulled, her hooves clopping softly on the clay. You lead her into the clean stall, and she walks in a slow circle, sniffing the fresh straw with her muzzle, her nostrils flaring at the new scent. She paws once at the bedding with a forehoof, a small experimental gesture, and then she lowers herself carefully, folding her legs beneath her with a controlled grace and settling onto the straw with a deep, rumbling sigh. You latch the half door and watch her for a moment as she stretches out her neck and rests her head on the soft bed, her eyes already closing. You repeat the entire process with the chestnut gelding stall, pushing the barrow back to the aisle and beginning again with a pitchfork. His stall is larger and he's a messier horse, so there is more soiled straw to remove and more sweeping to do. But the motions are the same, the rhythm unchanged, and your body moves through the work with a calm, mechanical ease. The gelding stands tied in the aisle, his head turned to watch you, and every so often he blows a soft, fluttering breath through his nostrils that ruffles the hairs on your arm when you pass. You fork out the damp straw, sweep the clay, wheel the barrow to the midden, and return with an armload of fresh, golden straw that you spread and fluff and pat into place. The gelding enters his clean stall with a brisk, eager step, circles twice, and then drops to the straw with a grunt of pure contentment, rolling once onto his back and kicking his legs in the air before settling onto his side with his eyes half closed. The dappled grey mare is next, and her stall requires a little extra care because she tends to push her straw into one corner and leave the rest of the floor bare. You fork out the compacted pile, sweep the empty area, and spread the new straw evenly across the whole space, making sure the corners are filled and the center is deep. She stands at the door, watching you work with her elegant head tilted, and when you are finished, she steps inside delicately, as if entering a drawing room, and lowers herself with a slow, fastidious precision that does not disturb a single stalk out of place. The tall grey gelding, the oldest horse, is already lying down when you reach his stall, and you work around him quietly, forking out the sorrow patches near the door while leaving the clean straw where he rests. He does not rise, only lifts his head once to look at you with his calm, ancient eyes, and then lowers it again, trusting you completely. You spread fresh straw over the bare spots and leave him in peace, latching the door with barely a sound. One by one you work your way through all the stalls, and the barrow fills and empties, the pitchfork rises and falls, the broom scratches and sweeps, and the straw rustles and fluffs. Your body moves through the tasks with a gentle, rhythmic efficiency, and the time passes without measure, marked only by the slow progression of stalls from one end of the stable to the other. The lamplight has dimmed further, the oil in the reservoirs now low, and you pause in the aisle to lift each lamp and tip a few drops of fresh oil from a clay flask into the reservoir, watching the flame brighten and steady in response. The shadows shrink back, and the stable returns to its warm, golden glow, the clean straw in the stalls reflecting the light with a pale, honeyed sheen. With the last stall finished, you wheel the barrow out to the midden one final time, and the pile is noticeably larger now, a dark mound against the starry sky, its warmth rising in faint, twisting ribbons of steam. The night air is colder than before, and you can feel the chill on your cheeks and the tips of your ears, so you do not linger, pushing the barrow back inside and closing the door firmly against the desert. You lean the pitchfork against its corner, hang the broom on its hook, and wipe your hands on a damp cloth, removing the last traces of straw dust and clay. The stable is quiet now in a new way, a deeper, more settled quiet, because every horse is lying down on clean, fresh bedding, their breathing slow and even, their bodies warm and comfortable. You walk the aisle one more time, looking over each half door, and you see the horses arranged like sculptures in a peaceful gallery. The bay mare curled in a crescent, the chestnut gelding sprawled on his side, the dappled grey mare with her legs tucked neatly beneath her, the tall grey gelding with his head resting on a pillow of straw. The sight fills you with a quiet satisfaction that has no sharp edges, only a soft, diffuse contentment that spreads through your chest and settles there. You return to the tack room and sit on the wooden stool, your back against the rough plank wall, and you listen to the stable breathing around you. The fresh straw crackles occasionally as a horse shifts in sleep, a sound like the turning of a page in a very large book, and the oil lamps burn with their small, steady flames, casting circles of light that overlap and pool on the clay floor. Your own breathing slows to match the rhythm of the horses, and you feel the tiredness in your body as a gentle weight, not unpleasant, just the natural result of honest work done well. The night is now at its deepest point, the hours stretching ahead with nothing more urgent than the quiet watch, and you close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and the silence and the smell of fresh straw wrap around you like a blanket, holding you in a place of perfect, unbroken peace. The fresh straw is down, the horses are resting on their clean beds, and the stable has entered the deepest, quietest stretch of the night. You stand in the center of the aisle with your hands resting lightly on your belt, feeling the slow, steady pull of the hours as they pass without measure. The oil lamps burn low and even, their flames small and still, and the shadows they cast along the beams are thick and soft, like folds of dark velvet draped across the wooden rafters. There is nothing left to do now except watch and listen, and this is perhaps the most important task of all, the simple, patient attention that keeps the horses safe through the long darkness. You begin a slow walk up the aisle, your boots making the familiar soft scuff on the clay floor, a sound that has become part of the stable's own breathing, and you let your eyes move from stall to stall, seeing the shapes of the horses in the dim light. You stop at the first stall and look over the half door, resting your forearms on the smooth, worn wood. The bay mare lies curled in the straw, her legs folded beneath her and her head resting on the soft bedding, her eyes fully closed and her ears relaxed to the sides. Her breathing is deep and regular, a slow rise and fall of her barrel that shifts the straw around her with a faint, continuous rustle. You watch the steady rhythm of her breath for a long moment, counting the seconds between each rise and fall without meaning to, and you see the occasional twitch of a muscle in her shoulder, a small involuntary movement that means she is dreaming. You wonder what a horse dreams of, perhaps of running across open ground under a wide sky, or perhaps of nothing at all, just the deep, wordless peace of rest. She does not stir as you watch, and you push yourself away from the door after a time, leaving her to her sleep. The chestnut gelding in the next stall is lying flat on his side, his legs stretched out and his head extended on the straw as if he has simply melted into the bedding. His breathing is slower than the mare's, a deep, heavy rhythm that makes his ribs expand and contract like a bellows, and every so often he lets out a long, fluttering sigh through his nostrils that sends a few stalks of straw skittering across the clay. You notice the way the lamplight catches the copper gleam of his coat, even in the dimness, and the way his ears twitch occasionally in response to some sound you cannot hear, some distant vibration that only a horse's senses can detect. You check that his water bucket is still half full and that his hay net hangs securely from its ring, and then you move on. The dappled grey mare is standing, unlike the others, and she turns her head toward you as you approach, her dark eyes catching the lamplight in two small, steady reflections. She is not restless, simply awake, and she stands with her weight balanced evenly on all four legs, her tail swishing gently from side to side in a slow, metronomic rhythm. You reach over the door and run your hand along the flat plane of her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin and the slight tickle of her short hairs, and she leans into the pressure just a little, a small, subtle movement that speaks of trust and comfort. You stand with her for a while, your hand on her face and her breath warm on your wrist, and the two of you share a wordless moment of companionship in the quiet dark. Eventually she lowers her head and snuffles at the straw, and you withdraw your hand and leave her to her own slow thoughts. The tall grey gelding, the oldest horse, lies in the corner of his stall with his head resting on a thick pillow of straw and his eyes half closed, the lids drooping heavily over the dark, liquid pupils. He is not quite asleep, not quite awake, suspended in a state of deep, dreamy rest that seems to fill the stall with a palpable calm. His breathing is the slowest of all the horses, a deep, measured pull of air that seems to take whole minutes to complete, and the sound of it is like the distant sigh of the sea, a low, continuous note that blends with the other stable sounds. You watch the grey hairs on his muzzle shift with each exhale, and you notice the way the lamplight softens the lines of his old face, smoothing out the years until he looks almost young again in the gentle glow. You do not disturb him, only stand and watch and listen, letting his deep peace settle into your own mind. You continue your slow walk, checking each stall in turn, and the pattern of your rounds becomes a kind of meditation, a steady circuit of the stable that marks the passage of the night without haste. At each door you pause, look, listen, and then move on, and your footsteps fall into a slow, even cadence that matches the rhythm of your breathing. The horses are all calm, all resting, and the stable is filled with the soft, layered sounds of their sleep, the rustle of straw as one shifts position, the low rumble of a stomach at work, the occasional deep exhale that seems to release all the tension of the day. These sounds are so familiar that you almost do not hear them anymore. They are simply the background music of your nights, a lullaby that plays on without end. Partway through your rounds, you notice that the oil in the lamps has burned down further, the flames now small and slightly unsteady, and you pause at the first lamp bracket to tend the light. You lift the glass globe with a cloth wrapped around your fingers, the glass warm but not hot, and you take the small clay flask of oil from the shelf near the tack room. The oil pours in a thin amber stream, blucking softly as it fills the reservoir, and the wick drinks it up with a faint, sucking sound that is like a thirsty animal at a stream. You adjust the wick with a small brass wheel, trimming the charred end carefully, and the flame rises again, bright and steady, pushing the shadows back. You move from lamp to lamp, repeating the small ritual of oiling and trimming, and the stable brightens in stages, each lamp flaring up in turn like a star coming out from behind a cloud. The horses do not stir at the increased light. They are too deeply asleep to notice such a small change, and you finish the task with a quiet sense of satisfaction, the stable now glowing warmly once more. As you walk the aisle again, your attention turns to the small details that are easy to overlook during the busier parts of the night. You notice a loose thread on the iron ring in one stall, a frayed bit of rope from a long ago lead, and you stop to pick it off and tuck it into your belt for disposal later. You see that the door of the feed room has swung slightly ajar, and you push it closed until the latch clicks. You run your hand along the stone trough at the back wall, feeling the cool, smooth stone and the slight dampness where the water has evaporated in the dry air, and you wipe away a small cobweb that has appeared in the corner since the evening. These are tiny, insignificant tasks, barely worth noticing, and yet they fill the quiet hours with a gentle purpose, a sense that you are not merely waiting, but actively caring for the stable and everything in it. The high windows near the roofline show a sliver of the night sky, and you pause beneath one to look up at the stars that are visible through the narrow opening. The sky is still black and clear, the stars still burning with their cold, steady light, and the desert wind has not yet risen, so the air inside the stable remains still and warm. You can feel the coolness radiating from the window glass, a faint breath of the outside air that slips through the tiny gaps in the frame. But it is not enough to chill the stable, only enough to keep the air fresh. You stand beneath the window for a while, your face tilted upward, and you listen to the immense silence that lies just beyond the walls, a silence so deep and complete that it seems to have a texture, a weight, a presence of its own. After a time you move to the stall of the older gelding again, because he sometimes grows stiff in the coldest hours and appreciates a blanket adjusted over his back. You open the door quietly and step inside, your boots sinking into the deep straw, and you find him still lying in the corner with his eyes half closed. A folded wool blanket rests on a wooden peg near the door, and you take it down, shaking it out gently so the folds fall open. The blanket is thick and warm, woven from undyed wool in shades of cream and brown, and it smells faintly of lanolin and cedar. You approach the gelding slowly, letting him see you and know your intention, and he lifts his head just enough to look at you with one calm, ancient eye before lowering it again. You drape the blanket over his back, smoothing it down from withers to rump, and you tuck the edges gently under the surcingle that runs around his barrel, making sure the fabric lies flat and does not bunch or pull. The gelding sighs, a long, slow exhale that seems to say thank you, and you pat his neck once, feeling the coarse, warm hair under your palm. You let yourself out of the stall and latch the door, leaving him wrapped in his wool cocoon. The quiet watch continues, and you find a place to sit for a while on a low wooden bench near the tack room, a simple seat of planed planks that has been in this spot for as long as anyone can remember. From here you can see almost the entire length of the stable, the rows of half-doors, the pools of lamplight, the soft, shadowed shapes of the horses in their stalls. You lean your back against the wall, and let your hands rest loosely in your lap, and you settle into the simple act of watching. Your eyes move slowly from one stall to the next, checking and rechecking, and your ears register every small sound, the rustle of straw, the drip of water from the trough, the faint creak of a timber cooling in the night. There is a deep, quiet pleasure in this vigilance, a satisfaction that comes from being present and attentive while the rest of the world sleeps. The hours slip by in this way, unmeasured and unhurried, and you feel the stable's peace settling into your bones like the warmth of a fire. Your own breathing has slowed to match the horses, and your mind has emptied of all the small worries and thoughts that usually clutter it. There is only the stable, the lamplight, the soft sounds, the gentle rhythm of the night. You are not sleepy exactly, but you are deeply relaxed, suspended in a state of calm awareness that is almost like floating. The darkness beyond the windows remains absolute, the stars still fixed in their slow, silent rotation, and you know that dawn is still many hours away, a distant promise that will arrive in its own time and not a moment sooner. Eventually you rise from the bench and make another slow circuit of the stable, your boots scuffing softly on the clay, your hands brushing the half-doors as you pass. The horses are all still resting, and the blankets are all still in place, and the lamps are all still burning steadily, and there is nothing that needs your attention, nothing out of order, nothing amiss. You pause in the center of the aisle and turn a slow circle, taking in the whole stable with a single, sweeping glance, the stalls, the lamps, the trough, the tack room door, the high windows, the heavy roof beams. It is all exactly as it should be, a small, perfect world of warmth and calm and quiet care, and you are its sole guardian in the long, deep night. You draw a slow breath, tasting the air that is thick with hay and horse and the faint, clean scent of the oil lamps, and you let it out just as slowly, feeling the deep peace of the quiet watch settle over you like a second blanket, warm and heavy and full of rest. The quiet watch has stretched on for an unmeasured time, and you feel a subtle restlessness begin to stir in your legs. Not a discomfort exactly, but a gentle signal from your body that it would welcome a change of position and a breath of fresh air. You rise from the wooden bench near the tack room, your muscles moving with the slow deliberation of deep calm, and you walk the length of the aisle toward the main door at the front of the stable. The horses do not stir as you pass. They are too deeply settled into their clean straw, their breathing a soft, layered chorus that fills the stable with its steady rhythm. You lift the heavy wooden bar that secures the door, feeling its weight and the smooth, worn grain of the timber under your hands, and you set it aside in its iron brackets with a quiet thud. The door swings open on its great iron hinges, and the desert night rushes in to meet you, cool and clean and vast beyond measure. You step out into the courtyard and pull the door nearly closed behind you, leaving only a sliver of warm lamplight spilling onto the sand. The change in the air is immediate and complete, the coolness wrapping around your face and hands like a cloth dipped in spring water, carrying with it a faint, dry scent of sagebrush and warm stone and the immense, empty spaces that stretch away in every direction. You take a deep breath, and the air feels thin and pure in your lungs, scoured clean by its long journey across the sand. Your boots sink slightly into the fine, cool sand of the courtyard, and the sound of your footsteps is soft and muffled, a quiet crunch that the vast silence swallows almost before it forms. You walk slowly toward the center of the courtyard, your eyes adjusting to the darkness, and the world around you opens up into a panorama of stars and shadow. The courtyard is a small square space enclosed by the stable on one side and by low stone walls on the other three, walls that were built long ago from the same pale, rough-hewn stone as the stable itself. The stones are cool to the touch when you reach out and rest your hand on the nearest wall, their surfaces roughened by wind and sand and the slow passage of years, and they radiate the stored chill of the desert night into your palm. In the center of the courtyard stands the well, its circular stone coping a darker shape against the sand, the wooden beam and crank outlined faintly against the starfield above. You walk a slow circuit of the courtyard, your footsteps carrying you past the well, past the small door that leads to the hay stall, past the midden gate at the back, and you feel the cool sand shift under your boots with each step, a soft, yielding surface that records your path in shallow depressions that will be erased by the next wind. When you reach the center of the courtyard again, you stop and tilt your head back to look up at the sky, and the sight that greets you is so vast and so beautiful that it stills your breath in your throat. The desert sky is a deep, velvety black, darker than any sky you have seen near towns or cities, and it is salted from horizon to horizon with stars in numbers that seem impossible, a great glittering river of light that arches overhead and spills down toward the dark line of the dunes. The Milky Way is a bright, cloudy band that cuts the sky in two, its edges soft and diffuse, and within it you can see the denser clusters of stars, the tiny bright pinpricks that are in fact vast furnaces burning at unimaginable distances. The constellations stand out clearly, their patterns sharp and distinct, the great hunter with his belt of 3 bright stars, the bear with her long tail, the eagle with outstretched wings, and a dozen others whose names you have heard but cannot recall. The stars do not twinkle as they do in moister climates. Here in the dry desert air, they burn with a steady, cold brilliance, each one a perfect, unwavering point of light. You stand in the center of the courtyard with your face turned upward, and you feel the immensity of the sky pressing down on you, not with weight, but with a kind of gentle, quiet awe that makes your own small concerns seem very distant and very unimportant. The silence is so complete that you can hear the faint, high ringing of your own ears, a sound that is always there but usually masked by the noise of daily life. And beneath that, you can hear the soft, regular pull of your own breathing. The desert stretches away beyond the walls in all directions, dark and featureless, and the horizon is a faint, jagged line where the black earth meets the star-filled sky. There are no lights anywhere, no campfires, no torches, no distant villages, only the cold, steady stars and the vast, patient darkness. You lower your gaze from the sky and continue your slow walk around the courtyard, your hands clasped loosely behind your back, your footsteps marking a steady, unhurried rhythm on the sand. The stable wall rises to your right, its pale stones gleaming faintly in the starlight, and the high windows glow with the soft amber light of the oil lamps within. The sight of that warm light spilling out into the cold desert night gives you a quiet sense of comfort, a reminder that the stable is there, waiting, full of sleeping horses and clean straw, and the steady burn of the lamps. You walk past the well and pause to rest your hand on the stone coping, feeling the cool, rough surface under your palm, and you look down into the dark mouth of the shaft. Far below, you can see nothing but blackness, but you hear the faint, distant drip of water, a single drop falling from the rope into the unseen pool, a sound that seems to come from very far away and very long ago. The air in the courtyard is still, with no wind at all, and the silence is so deep that it seems to have a texture, a soft, velvety presence that wraps around you and isolates you from the rest of the world. You can hear, very faintly, the distant call of a night bird somewhere out in the desert, a single, low note that rises and falls and then is gone, leaving the silence even deeper than before. The sound does not repeat, and you are not certain you heard it at all. It might have been a trick of the imagination, a sound conjured by the darkness and the solitude. You listen for it again, straining your ears, but there is only the silence and the faint drip from the well and the soft whisper of your own breath. You walk to the low stone wall at the edge of the courtyard and stand with your hands resting on its rough capstone, looking out at the desert beyond. The sand stretches away into darkness, pale and ghostly in the starlight, and the dunes rise and fall in long, smooth curves like the backs of sleeping animals. There are rocks scattered across the sand, dark shapes that break the smooth contours, and farther out you can see the faint, spiky silhouettes of thorn bushes and the occasional twisted shape of a desert tree. Nothing moves out there, no animals, no wind, no shifting of the sand, and the stillness is so complete that the landscape seems like a painting, a frozen scene that will remain unchanged for eternity. You breathe in the cool, dry air and let it out slowly, feeling the tension of the day drain from your shoulders and neck, feeling the deep, quiet peace of the desert fill the empty spaces in your mind. After a time, you turn away from the desert and walk to the small door in the outer wall that leads to the water trough for the paddock horses, though there are no horses in the paddock tonight. You lift the wooden latch and push the door open, and it swings with a soft creak on its leather hinges. The paddock is a larger enclosure beyond the courtyard, a fenced area of packed sand where the horses can walk and stretch their legs during the day, and its water trough is a smaller stone basin fed by a pipe from the main well. You walk to the trough and check it by starlight, running your fingers over the rim and dipping them into the water. The trough is nearly full, the water cool and clean, and there is no debris or algae on the surface. You wipe your wet fingers on your tunic and turn back, closing the paddock gate behind you and latching it carefully. Back in the courtyard, you find yourself reluctant to return inside just yet, because the night is so beautiful and the silence is so complete, and you know that you will not see such stars again until tomorrow, and tomorrow is still a long way off. You walk to the well one more time and sit on the low stone rim, feeling the coolness of the stone through the fabric of your trousers. The well is solid and ancient behind you, and you lean back slightly, resting your weight on your hands, and you look up at the sky again. The stars have shifted just a little since you last looked, the whole great wheel of the heavens turning slowly around the pole star that hangs fixed and steady in the north. You watch the stars for a long, slow time, letting your eyes wander from one constellation to the next, tracing the patterns with your gaze, and the vast, silent motion of the sky is like a lullaby that fills your mind with calm. The cold begins to make itself felt after a while, a gentle chill that creeps through the fabric of your tunic and makes the skin on your arms prickle slightly. You rise from the well rim and stamp your feet once or twice to warm them, the sand crunching under your boots, and you take one last look around the courtyard, at the pale walls, the dark well, the warm glow of the stable windows. The night has wrapped itself around you like a cloak, and you feel calm and quiet and deeply at peace, ready to return to the warmth and the lamplight and the steady breathing of the horses. You walk back to the main door of the stable, your footsteps retracing the path you made earlier, and you pause with your hand on the iron handle to look up at the stars one final time. The Milky Way glimmers overhead, vast and silent, and you feel a small, quiet gratitude for being here, in this place, on this night, under this sky. You pull the door open and step inside, and the warmth of the stable wraps around you immediately, a soft, hay-scented embrace that drives the chill from your skin. The lamplight seems bright after the starlight, and you blink a few times as your eyes adjust, seeing the familiar shapes of the stalls and the horses and the long aisle stretching before you. You close the door behind you and lift the heavy bar back into its brackets, and the thud of the timber seating into place is a solid, reassuring sound that seals the stable off from the vast, cold night outside. The horses are all still resting, undisturbed by your brief absence, and the sounds of their breathing fill the stable with a steady, living rhythm. You walk down the aisle, running your hand along the half-doors as you pass, and you feel the warmth of the stable settling back into your bones, a warmth that is more than just temperature, a warmth that comes from being in a place of safety and care and quiet, purposeful work. You return to the wooden bench near the tack room and sit down again, your legs slightly tired from the walking and the standing, and you let your body sink into the familiar, comfortable position. The stable is exactly as you left it, the lamps burning, the horses sleeping, the straw rustling softly, and yet you feel subtly refreshed, your mind cleared by the cold air and the starlight and the immense silence of the desert. You fold your hands in your lap and settle back against the wall, and you listen to the stable breathing around you, a sound that is now as familiar as your own heartbeat. The night continues, deep and quiet and full of peace, and you wait in the warm, golden lamplight, ready for whatever small task the next hour will bring. You rise from the wooden bench, your body moving with the slow, deliberate ease of deep night, and you turn your attention to the hay nets. The horses have been resting for some hours now on their fresh straw, their bellies full of grain and their thirst quenched with cool well water. But even in the quietest stretch of the night, they benefit from a small amount of hay to keep their digestion steady and their minds content. A horse's stomach is a delicate thing, needing a slow, continuous trickle of roughage to stay healthy, and the hay nets will give them something to nibble on through the remaining hours until dawn. You walk toward the hay store, the lean-to built against the north wall of the stable, and your footsteps on the clay are soft and unhurried, matching the slow rhythm of the sleeping animals around you. The hay store is a small enclosed space with walls of timber and a roof that slopes down from the main stable wall. Its door a simple wooden frame fitted with leather hinges that creak faintly when you pull it open. Inside, the air is dry and sweet, thick with the scent of cured grass and clover and the faint, dusty undertone of old straw. The bales are stacked in neat rows against the walls, their rectangular shapes solid and orderly, and the twine that binds them is rough and golden, twisted from sisal fibers that prickle against your fingers. A single small lamp hangs from a beam overhead, its flame burning low and steady, casting long shadows that stretch across the piled bales and the swept dirt floor. You stand for a moment just inside the door, letting your senses adjust to the deeper quiet of this small enclosed space, and you breathe in the sweet grassy smell that is one of the most comforting scents in the world. You choose a bale from the middle of the stack, one that has already been opened and partially used, its twine cut and folded back to expose the compressed layers of green gold hay within. The bale is heavy but manageable, and you lift it with both hands, feeling the rough prickle of the cut stalks against your palms and the solid, dense weight of it pressing against your chest. You carry it out of the hay store and set it down on the clay floor of the aisle, near the wall where the hay nets hang from a row of wooden pegs. The nets are made of thick, knotted cordage with wide meshes that allow the horses to pull the hay through in small, steady mouthfuls, and they are empty now, hanging limp and loose against the wall, waiting to be filled. You take down the first net and shake it out, the cordage rustling with a dry, whispery sound, and you spread the opening wide with both hands. You kneel beside the bale and begin to separate the hay into flakes, the compressed layers peeling apart with a soft, crackling tear. Each flake is a flat, dense mat of dried grass stems and clover leaves, and you crumble it between your fingers to loosen the strands, releasing a fresh burst of sweet, summery fragrance into the air. The hay is a pale green-gold color, the color of sunlight on a meadow, and it is studded with the tiny, dried heads of clover and the occasional purple fleck of vetch. You stuff the loosened hay into the net, pushing it down with your hands to pack it firmly, and the net begins to swell and take shape, its meshes bulging with the fragrant load. You work steadily, your hands moving with a practiced automatic rhythm, and the pile of empty netting beside you shrinks as the filled nets accumulate on the other side, each one plump and round and heavy with hay. The process of filling the nets is repetitive and calm, your mind drifting as your hands do the work. You count the nets as you fill them, one for every 2 stalls, because the horses will share if the nets are hung between them, and the number comes to 6 in total, enough for all 12 horses in your care. Each net receives the same amount of hay, roughly 2 full flakes, and you press the hay down firmly so it will not fall out when the net is hung. When a net is full, you pull the drawstring tight, closing the opening with a quick, practiced knot, and you set the net aside with the others, the cordage rasping softly against itself. The pile of filled nets grows beside you, a row of bulging, fragrant sacks that look like oversized feed bags, and the bale of hay shrinks in proportion, its layers peeling away one by one until only a thin, flat slab remains, which you set aside for the morning. When all 6 nets are filled, you rise from your kneeling position and stretch your back, feeling the slight stiffness in your spine from the bent posture. You brush the loose hay from the front of your tunic and pick up the first 2 nets, one in each hand, their weight pulling at your arms and the cordage pressing into your fingers. You walk down the aisle to the far end of the stable, where the bay mare and the chestnut gelding occupy the first 2 stalls, and you hang one net on the iron ring set into the wooden post between their doors. The ring is worn smooth and shiny from years of use, and the net's drawstring loop fits over it easily, settling into place with a soft, metallic jingle. You adjust the net so it hangs at the correct height, high enough that the horses cannot get a leg caught, but low enough that they can reach it comfortably, and you step back to check your work. The bay mare is the first to notice the hay, her nostrils flaring as the sweet scent reaches her, and she rises from her straw bed with a slow, careful unfolding of her long legs. She steps to the half door and stretches her neck toward the net, her lips already moving in anticipation, and she takes a first gentle mouthful of hay, pulling the strands through the mesh with a soft, tearing sound. Her jaws begin to work in a slow, circular grind, and her eyes half close with contentment as the taste of the hay fills her mouth. The chestnut gelding, on the other side of the post, has also risen and is nosing at the net from his side, his lips pulling at a different section of the mesh, and the 2 horses stand side by side, separated by the wooden post, eating in quiet companionship. You watch them for a moment, the steady rhythm of their chewing a soft, continuous sound that blends with the other stable noises, and then you move on to hang the next net. The second net goes between the dappled grey mare and the tall grey gelding, and the third between the next 2 stalls, and so on down the line until every pair of stalls has its own hay net hanging between them. You work your way back along the aisle, adjusting each net to the right height, checking that the knots are secure, and watching as the horses discover the new hay and begin to eat. Some of them rise immediately, while others take their time, finishing a dream or a rest before they stir, and you notice the different ways they approach the net. The dappled grey mare takes small, delicate mouthfuls, nibbling at the very edge of the mesh as if she is at a banquet table, while the tall grey gelding pulls great greedy tufts of hay, free and chews them with his eyes closed, his old jaws grinding slowly and patiently. Each horse has its own manner, its own rhythm, and you find a quiet pleasure in observing these small individual differences. The sound of hay being slowly consumed is one of the softest sounds in the world, a whisper of dried grass being drawn through cordage, punctuated by the occasional deep exhale of a horse blowing dust from its nostrils. The stable is filled with this gentle, rustling music now, the nets swaying slightly as the horses tug at them, the hay crackling and tearing, the jaws working in their steady, circular grind. You walk the aisle slowly, passing between the rows of stalls, and you feel the peace of the scene settling over you like a warm, heavy blanket. The lamplight catches the particles of hay dust that float in the air, tiny golden specks that drift and swirl in the still air, and the scent of the fresh hay has spread throughout the stable, mixing with the older, deeper smells of horse and leather and oil. You pause at the stall of the tall grey gelding and watch him eat, his old grey muzzle working with a slow, deliberate patience that seems to speak of a lifetime of quiet meals. The hay disappears into his mouth in small, steady increments, and his eyes are nearly closed, the long, pale lashes resting on his cheeks. You reach over the half-door and rest your hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of his skin and the slight vibration of his chewing, and he does not stop eating, only flicks one ear back toward you in acknowledgement. The moment is small and ordinary, and yet it fills you with a deep, quiet contentment that is all the more precious for being so simple. You withdraw your hand after a time and move on, leaving the old horse to his midnight meal. As you walk the aisle, you notice that one of the nets is hanging a little too low, its bottom nearly touching the clay floor, and you stop to adjust it. You lift the net and pull the drawstring tighter, shortening the loop so the net rises to the correct height, and you test the knot with a firm tug to make sure it will hold. The horses in the adjacent stalls watch you with mild curiosity, their jaws still working, and then they return to their hay without concern. You check the other nets as well, testing each one with a gentle pull, and you find them all secure and properly hung, the cordage strong and the knots tight. This small attention to detail is part of the rhythm of the night, a constant, gentle vigilance that keeps everything in order and the horses safe. With the nets all hung and the horses all eating, you return to the bale of hay and the small scattering of loose stalks that have fallen onto the clay floor. You gather the loose hay into a pile with your hands, the dry stalks crackling softly, and you stuff it into an empty net that you hang on a peg for later use. You sweep the floor around the bale with the small hand broom, collecting the last bits of chaff and dust, and you carry the remnants of the bale back into the hay store, setting it on top of the stack where it will be easy to reach in the morning. The hay store is tidy and orderly now, the bales stacked neatly, the floor swept clean, the lamp burning steadily on its beam, and you close the door with a quiet click of the latch. Back in the aisle, the stable has returned to its deep, steady rhythm. The horses now divided between those still eating from the nets and those who have taken their fill and returned to their straw beds. The bay mare has finished her hay and is lying down again, her head resting on the soft bedding, while the chestnut gelding is still pulling at the net with a determined, methodical persistence. The dappled grey mare has eaten only a little, and now stands with her head over the half-door, gazing at nothing in particular with a dreamy, far-away expression. The tall grey gelding has finished his hay as well, and is lowering himself carefully onto the straw, his old joints bending with a slow, creaking dignity, and he settles onto his side with a deep, rumbling sigh that seems to come from the very center of his being. You walk to the stone trough and check the water level, finding it still high and clean, and you run your hand over the surface to disturb the thin film of dust that has settled there. The water ripples outward in slow circular waves that lap against the stone sides, and the lamplight shivers and dances on the disturbed surface. You dry your hand on your tunic and turn back to the aisle, feeling the deep, settled quiet of the stable wrapping around you like a familiar garment. The hay nets sway gently as the remaining horses tug at them, and the soft sound of chewing continues, a quiet, living rhythm that will carry on through the remaining hours of darkness. You return to the wooden bench near the tack room and sit down, your legs grateful for the rest after the standing and walking and lifting. You lean your back against the rough plank wall and let your hands rest loosely in your lap, and you listen to the stable breathing around you, the sounds of hay and chewing and the occasional rustle of straw blending into a single, continuous lullaby. The night is now well past its midpoint, sliding slowly and imperceptibly toward the distant shore of dawn, and you feel a deep, quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that every task has been done, every horse has been fed and watered and brushed and bedded, and the stable is at peace. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but simply to rest in the warm, hay-scented darkness, and you let the steady rhythm of the night carry you forward into the quiet hours that remain. The hay nets are hung, and the horses are eating or resting, and the stable has settled into a rhythm so deep and so steady that it feels like the breathing of a single, enormous animal wrapped around you. You walk the aisle slowly, your boots making their familiar soft scuff on the clay, and you pause at each stall to look over the half doors at the horses within. Most of them are lying down now, their bellies full and their bodies warm, and the sound of their breathing is a soft, layered chorus that rises and falls with the slow, patient rhythm of the deep night. The oil lamps burn low and steady, their flames small golden buds that cast circles of light onto the straw and the wooden doors, and the shadows in the rafters are thick and soft, like folds of dark wool. You have done all the tasks that the night requires, and now there is nothing left but to watch and wait, to be present in the quiet heart of the stable until the first grey light of dawn begins to creep through the high windows. As you walk, your attention keeps returning to the stall of the tall grey gelding, the oldest horse in your care, who occupies the large corner stall at the far end of the aisle. Something about him draws you tonight, perhaps the deep, unshakable calm that surrounds him like an invisible cloak, or perhaps simply the quiet invitation of his steady, gentle presence. You have always felt a particular fondness for this horse, with his patient eyes and his slow, deliberate way of moving, as if he has learned over his many years that there is no need to hurry, that everything will come in its own time. You stop outside his stall and look over the half door, and you see that he is standing, not lying down like the others, his head turned toward the hay net that hangs between his stall and the next. He has finished most of his hay, and now he is simply standing, his weight balanced evenly on all four legs, his ears relaxed and his eyes half closed in an expression of deep, uncomplicated peace. You lift the iron latch as quietly as you can, the metal cool and smooth under your fingers, and you swing the half door open just wide enough to slip inside. The gelding turns his head towards you as you enter, his large dark eyes catching the lamplight in two soft, liquid pools, and his ears swivel forward for a moment, then relax back to their resting position. He knows you, and he trusts you, and he sees no reason to be alarmed by your presence in his stall at this quiet hour. You close the door behind you with a soft click of the latch, and you stand for a moment just inside, letting the atmosphere of the stall settle around you. The straw is deep and clean under your boots, the fresh bedding you spread earlier still springy and fragrant, and the air smells of hay and horse and the faint clean scent of the wool blanket draped over the gelding's back. The stall feels like a small room within the larger room of the stable, a private, enclosed space of warmth and shadow and quiet breathing. In the corner of the stall, near the stone wall that forms the outside of the stable, there is a low wooden block that serves as a mounting step when the horses are taken out to the paddock. It is a simple thing, a thick slab of timber planed smooth and set on four short legs, and it makes a serviceable seat when you need to sit and rest. You cross the stall with slow, careful steps, your boots sinking into the straw, and you settle yourself onto the wooden block, your back against the cool, rough surface of the stone wall. The stone is cold through the fabric of your tunic, a pleasant, grounding sensation that keeps you alert and present, and the wood of the block is smooth and worn, polished by years of use. You arrange yourself comfortably, your hands resting loosely in your lap, and you turn your attention to the gelding, who has returned to his hay net and is pulling at the remaining strands with slow, deliberate tugs. The lamplight falls on his dappled grey coat in a soft golden wash, and you find yourself mesmerized by the play of light and shadow across the contours of his body. His coat is a pale silvery grey, almost white in places, but it is overlaid with a pattern of darker dapples, small circular spots that cluster along his barrel and flanks and fade away toward his shoulders and neck. The dapples seem to shift and change as he moves, the light catching them at different angles, and they give his coat a depth and a richness that is like watered silk. You watch the way the muscles shift under his skin with each small movement, the subtle play of his shoulder as he reaches for the hay, the ripple of his flank as he breathes, the gentle twitch of the skin over his ribs when a fly that is not there might have landed. Every part of him is alive and present, and yet he is so deeply at ease that his movements are almost dreamlike, slow and fluid and without tension. His breathing is steady and deep, a slow rhythmic rise and fall of his barrel that you can see in the gentle expansion and contraction of his ribs. Each breath is a long, measured pull of air through his nostrils, followed by an equally long, slow exhale that flutters the fine hairs on his muzzle and stirs the loose strands of hay in the net. The sound of his breathing is soft and low, a continuous whispery note that blends with the rustle of the hay and the distant muted sounds of the other horses in their stalls. You let your own breathing fall into the same slow rhythm, matching the gelding's pace without conscious effort, and you feel the last remnants of any tension in your body begin to dissolve. The stall is a small island of quiet, within the quiet of the stable, and you are content to sit here, watching, for as long as the night will allow. The gelding's ears are in constant gentle motion, rotating forward and back to catch sounds that you cannot hear, the subtle symphony of the stable and the desert beyond. When a horse in another stall shifts in its straw, his nearest ear swivels toward the sound, pauses, and then returns to its resting position. When a distant night bird calls out in the desert, a faint single note that comes through the high window, both ears prick forward for a moment and then relax again. His hearing is so much sharper than yours, his awareness of the world so much wider, and yet he shows no alarm, only a calm, attentive curiosity. You watch the delicate, expressive movement of his ears with a quiet fascination, the way they can point independently, the way the fine hairs inside them catch the lamplight, the way they seem to have a language of their own that you can almost understand. His tail swishes slowly from side to side in a lazy, metronomic rhythm, brushing against his hindquarters with a soft, whispery sound. The tail is long and thick, the hairs are darker grey than his coat, almost charcoal at the roots, and it moves with a life of its own, independent of his conscious thought. Sometimes it flicks sharply to one side, perhaps in response to an imagined insect, and then it returns to its slow, sweeping arc. You watch the tail, and the way the lamplight catches the individual hairs, and you notice how the rhythm of its movement seems to match the rhythm of his breathing, as if his whole body is a single harmonious instrument playing a slow, silent melody. As you sit on the wooden block, your back against the cool stone, you begin to notice details that you might otherwise miss, the small particular things that make this horse uniquely himself. There is a small scar on his left shoulder, a thin, pale line that runs diagonally across the muscle, the remnant of some long-ago injury that has healed clean and left no lasting damage. The hair over the scar is white where it grew back, a tiny streak of brightness against the grey, and you wonder idly what caused it, perhaps a sharp stone on a desert trail or the branch of a thorn bush, but the gelding shows no memory of it now. You notice that his left hind sock rises a little higher than his right, the white marking extending up to the middle of his cannon bone on the one leg and stopping just above the fetlock on the other, a small asymmetry that adds to his character. You notice the gentle curve of his jaw as he chews the hay, the way the bone moves under the skin in a smooth, rolling motion, the way his lips work with a delicate precision to pull the strands through the mesh. His eyes are dark and soft, the color of deep water under a cloudy sky, and they are framed by long, pale lashes that catch the lamplight and make him look gentle and wise. When he turns his head toward you, which he does occasionally, his gaze is calm and steady, without fear or demand, simply acknowledging your presence and then returning to his hay. There is a deep intelligence in those eyes, a quiet, patient awareness that has seen many years and many miles, and you feel a sense of humility in his presence, as if you are in the company of a being who knows things you will never know. You do not try to interpret his thoughts or imagine what he is feeling. You simply sit and observe, letting the experience of watching him fill your mind without analysis or judgment. Time stretches without measure as you sit there, the minutes blending into one another like the colors in a fading sunset. You have no way of knowing how long you have been in the stall, and you do not care to know, because the act of watching is its own reward, complete and sufficient in itself. The gelding finishes the last of his hay at some point, pulling the final wisp through the mesh with a soft tearing sound, and he chews it slowly, his jaws grinding in their steady, circular rhythm, until the last bit of fiber is reduced to a soft mash that he swallows with a quiet gulp. He licks his lips once, a long pink tongue sweeping across the soft, velvety muzzle, and then he turns away from the hay net and faces you directly. His dark eyes meet yours, and for a long, still moment, the two of you simply look at each other. There is no expectation in his gaze, no request, no question, just a calm, steady acknowledgement of your presence that feels like a gift. You do not move, and neither does he, and the silence between you is full and rich, like the silence that fills a great cathedral. The lamplight flickers once, a tiny dance of the flame, and the shadows in the stall shift and resettle. And still you sit, your hands loose in your lap, your breathing slow and deep, your mind as quiet and empty as the desert sky. After a time, the gelding lowers his head, breaking the shared gaze with a slow, deliberate movement, and he lets out a long, slow breath through his nostrils that stirs the straw near his feet. The exhale is deep and full, a release of air that seems to carry with it all the accumulated weariness of his long life, and when it is finished, he stands with his head low and his eyes half closed, the very picture of peace. You rise from the wooden block, your legs a little stiff from the sitting, and you cross the stall with slow, quiet steps until you are standing beside him. You reach out and rest your hand on his worn neck, feeling the coarse, springy hair under your palm and the solid, living warmth of the skin beneath. The pulse of his blood is a steady, rhythmic throb against your fingers, a quiet reminder of the life that flows through him, and you stand there with your hand on his neck, feeling the connection between you, simple and wordless and true. The gelding does not move except to shift his weight slightly, leaning into your touch with the faintest pressure, and you stay with him like that for a slow count of breaths, in and out, in and out. Then you lift your hand, pat his neck once with a gentle final touch, and turn away. You cross the stall to the half door, lift the latch as quietly as you can, and let yourself out into the aisle. You pull the door closed behind you until the latch clicks into place, a small, metallic sound that is final and satisfying, and you stand for a moment in the aisle, looking back at the gelding through the half door. He has turned around in his stall and is lowering himself carefully onto the clean straw, his old joints bending with a slow, creaking dignity, and he settles onto his side with a deep, rumbling sigh that seems to come from the very bottom of his being. His eyes close, and within moments his breathing deepens into the slow, regular rhythm of sleep. You turn away from the stall and walk back toward the wooden bench near the tack room, your footsteps soft on the clay, your mind quiet and calm, and full of the image of the old grey horse resting in the lamplight. The night continues, deep and still and full of peace, and you feel a quiet gratitude for this small, ordinary moment, this time spent in the company of a creature who asks nothing of you but your presence. You sit down on the bench and lean your head back against the wall, and you let the sounds of the stable wash over you, the breathing and the rustling and the soft, steady drip of water from the trough, a lullaby that will carry you through the last quiet hours until dawn. The sky through the high window above the hay store begins to pale, shifting from the deep, velvety black of full night to a softer, thinner darkness that has the faintest hint of indigo at its edges. You notice the change not as a sudden event, but as a slow, gradual lightening, a subtle dilution of the shadows that you might have missed if you'd not been watching the window for so long. The stars that were visible through the narrow glass are fading now, one by one, their cold brilliance dimming as the sky behind them brightens, and you know that the long night is finally approaching its end. You rise from the wooden bench near the tack room, your body moving with the slow, deliberate care of someone who has been awake for many hours, and you feel a quiet, tired satisfaction settling in your chest. The knowledge that you have kept the stable safe and the horses comfortable through the darkness, and that the dawn will soon arrive to relieve you. The oil lamps are still burning, but their light seems paler now, thinner and less golden than before, as if the approaching day has already begun to dilute their glow. You walk the aisle slowly, your boots scuffing on the clay, and you look into each stall as you pass. The horses are stirring, some of them rising from their straw beds with a stretch and a shake that sends their blankets flapping, others still lying down, but with their eyes open and their ears pricked forward, sensing the change in the air that signals the coming of morning. The bay mare is standing and stretching her neck, her head arched and her nostrils flaring as she breathes in the fresher, cooler air that seeps through the cracks in the stable walls. The chestnut gelding is already on his feet, his hay net empty and his water bucket half drained, and he nickers softly when he sees you pass, a low, rumbling sound that seems to say good morning. The dappled grey mare is still lying down, but her eyes are open and watchful, her ears swivelling toward the sounds of the other horses moving. The tall grey gelding, the old one, is standing with his head over the half-door, his ancient eyes calm and knowing, and he greets you with a slow blink that feels like a benediction. You stop at the main door of the stable and lift the heavy wooden bar from its brackets, setting it aside with a solid thud that echoes once through the aisle. You pull the door open, and the desert air that slips inside is cool and clean, carrying the faint, dry scent of sage and sand and the immense open spaces beyond the walls. The sky in the east is pale now, a band of soft, pearlescent grey that hugs the horizon, and above it the indigo is fading into a lighter blue, the stars disappearing one by one as the light grows. The courtyard is still in deep shadow, the sand cool and grey, the well a dark silhouette against the brightening sky. You stand in the doorway for a moment, breathing the fresh air, feeling the coolness on your face, and the promise of warmth that will come when the sun finally rises above the dunes. The night is over, or nearly so, and there is a quiet beauty in this transitional hour, this liminal space between darkness and light. You turn back into the stable and begin your final rounds, the last small tasks that will close out the night and prepare the horses for the day ahead. The water trough is still nearly full, but the level has dropped a little as the horses have drunk through the night, and you take the clay jug from its place by the door and step outside to the well. The crank creaks in the silence, the rope rasps over the wheel, and the bucket splashes far below in the darkness of the shaft, the sounds crisp and clear in the cold, still air. You draw up the water and carry the jug back inside, pouring it carefully into the trough until the level rises to the brim, the water clear and cold and reflecting the pale light from the doorway. You wipe the rim of the trough with a cloth, removing the thin film of dust that has settled, and you stand back to survey your work, the stone basin now full and clean and ready for the thirsty horses. The hay nets that you hung in the deep night are mostly empty now, the last strands of hay pulled through the meshes and consumed, and you go from stall to stall collecting them. You lift each net from its iron ring, the cordage soft and worn in your hands, and you shake out the loose chaff and dust before hanging the empty nets on their pegs near the hay store, ready to be filled again when the day's routine begins. The horses watch you with mild interest, their heads turning as you move along the aisle, and a few of them nudge at the empty rings with their noses as if to ask where the hay is gone. You pat the nearest neck, feeling the warmth on the coarse, springy hair, and you murmur a few quiet words that mean nothing and everything. In the feed room, you prepare a final small scoop of grain for the horses that will need energy for the day ahead, the ones that are scheduled for riding or training when the sun is higher. You consult the list on the wall, running your finger down the names, and you measure out half scoops into 3 buckets, the grain rustling softly as it pours. The bay mare receives a small portion, as does the chestnut gelding, and the 3rd bucket goes to a younger horse in the middle stall who has been building muscle and needs the extra nourishment. You carry the buckets to the stalls and hook them onto the iron brackets, and the horses lower their heads to eat with the same steady, rhythmic grinding of jaws that has marked every feeding through the night. The sound is comforting and familiar, a quiet music that fills the stable as the light outside continues to grow. You take a soft cloth and a small pot of leather dressing from the tack room, and you settle onto the wooden stool to tend the bridles and bits that hang on the wall. The leather is dark and supple, smelling of oil and age and the faint, salty trace of horse sweat, and you work the dressing into each strap with slow, circular motions, your fingers pressing the oil into the fibers until the surface gleams faintly in the lamplight. The bits are polished already, but you wipe them down anyway with a clean corner of the cloth, removing any tarnish that has appeared since the last cleaning, and the metal shines with a soft, silver glow. The work is repetitive and soothing, your hands moving in a steady rhythm that requires no thought, and you lose yourself in the simple, tactile pleasure of caring for the equipment, the leather warming under your fingers, the scent of the dressing filling the small room. The sounds outside the stable are changing now, the silence of the night giving way to the first tentative calls of birds, a few scattered notes that rise and fall and then repeat, a hesitant, experimental chorus that grows bolder as the light strengthens. You can hear a lark somewhere out in the desert, its song a long liquid trill that spirals upward and then fades, and the cooing of doves that have nested in the rafters of the hay store, their soft, mournful calls blending with the other sounds. The desert is waking, and the stable is waking with it, the horses more alert now, some of them moving restlessly in their stalls, ready for the day to begin in earnest. You rise from the stool and hang the bridles back on their pegs, the leather gleaming and soft, the bits catching the light. You take the broom from its corner and sweep the aisle one final time, gathering the scattered hay and chaff and the fine powdery dust that has accumulated since midnight. The broom scratches on the clay in long, even strokes, and the dust rises in a thin haze that drifts toward the open door and disappears into the growing light. You sweep around the stone trough and the feed-room door and the wooden bench, and you collect the sweepings into a small pile that you tip into the barrow. The barrow is empty now, its load of soiled straw long since deposited on the midden pile, and the clean wood gleams in the pale morning light. You walk to each lamp bracket along the aisle, lifting the glass globes one by one and pinching the wicks between your fingers to extinguish the flames. The small golden buds of light disappear with a faint smoky hiss, and the smell of warm oil and burnt wick lingers in the air for a moment before dissipating. The stable grows dimmer with each lamp you extinguish, the shadows retreating and the natural light from the doorway and the high windows taking over, a cool grey illumination that is softer and more diffuse than the lamplight. You wipe the glass globes with a clean cloth, removing the soot that has gathered on the insides, and you set them back in their brackets, the metal warm under your fingers. The lamps are ready for the next night, their reservoirs full of oil and their wicks trimmed, and you feel the satisfaction of a task completed, a cycle closed. The main door stands open now, and the courtyard outside is bathed in the soft grey light of early dawn, the sand pale and cool, the well casting a long shadow toward the stable wall. You step outside one last time, the cool air wrapping around you, and you look up at the sky, which is now a pale, washed blue overhead, the last stars fading on the western horizon. The band of light on the eastern horizon has brightened from grey to a soft, peachy gold, and the dunes are beginning to glow with the first, indirect light of the sun that is still hidden below the edge of the world. The desert stretches away in every direction, vast and silent and beautiful, and the air smells of sand and sage and the faint, clean scent of a new day beginning. You return to the stable and walk the aisle one more time, checking each stall with a slow, careful eye. The horses are all well, their coats gleaming, their water buckets full, their straw clean and deep. The hay nets are hung and ready, The feed room is tidy, the tack room is orderly, the trough is brimming with cool water. There is nothing left to do. No task that has been forgotten, no detail that has been overlooked. The night is over and the stable is at peace, and you have done everything that needed to be done. One small task at a time, from twilight to dawn. You walk to the tack room and gather your blanket from the wooden peg where it hangs. A thick wool blanket in a muted shade of brown that smells faintly of lanolin and cedar. You carry it to the small cot in a corner of the tack room, a simple wooden frame with a thin mattress stuffed with straw, and you spread the blanket over it, smoothing out the folds with your hands. The cot is not large, but it is comfortable enough, and the straw mattress rustles softly as you sit down on its edge and pull off your boots, setting them side by side on the floor. You swing your legs up onto the cot and lie back, your head sinking into the folded cloth that serves as a pillow, and you pull the blanket up to your chin, feeling the warmth of the wool settling around you. The stable sounds wash over you as you lie there, your eyes growing heavy, your body sinking into the straw mattress with a deep, grateful tiredness. The horses are moving in their stalls, their hooves clopping softly on the clay, and you can hear the rustle of hay as someone pulls a mouthful from a net, the quiet gulping of a horse drinking from the trough, the soft, rumbling nickers that pass between them in the grey light of morning. The birds outside are singing more loudly now, a full chorus of larks and doves and sparrows, and the cool air drifting through the open door carries the promise of warmth to come. Your breathing slows and deepens, matching the rhythm of the horses, and your thoughts grow soft and diffuse, drifting like the dust motes in the morning light. You think of the night that has passed, the slow, steady round of feeding and watering and grooming and bedding, the quiet watch in the lamplit aisle, the vast starry sky over the courtyard, the old grey gelding with his calm, ancient eyes. The memories are soft and warm, like stones worn smooth by water, and they settle into your mind without urgency or weight. The stable is safe, the horses are content, and the day shift will arrive soon to take over the care. You close your eyes and let the sounds of the stable wrap around you, a lullaby of breath and straw, and the gentle, living presence of the animals that you have tended through the night. The sun rises above the dunes as you drift into sleep, its first golden rays slanting through the high windows and falling in long, dusty beams across the aisle. The light touches the stone trough and makes the water gleam, touches the brass fittings on the bridles and makes them sparkle, touches the grey coat of the old gelding and turns him to silver. The stable is quiet and warm, filled with the peace of a new day and the deep, abiding calm that comes from work done well and creatures cared for. You sleep, and your breathing is slow and even, and the stable holds you in its quiet embrace, waiting for the night to come again.